We lived outside of Hinesville, Arkansas, about 2 miles and about 7 miles west of Huntsville. Well, my dad started out in the old days, everybody farmed. And he was actually the first person in our family to get a job. When they started paving what is now 412, it was Highway 68 in the old days. When they started paving that highway, he got a job with the highway department. He actually went down there to sell them some milk. He milked a couple of cows, and he went down to sell the workers some milk at lunch, and they hired him. And from there, he also raised chickens, cows, and pigs on the farm, and he went to work for the Arkansas Livestock Sanitary Commission as a hog inspector. Wound up his career as USDA egg inspector. I worked in the hay fields as a youngster. They taught me how to drive a tractor when I was 12 for 50 cents an hour. I raked hay, hauled hay, picked anything that they grew, strawberries, cucumbers, so on. In the summertime, I worked for the Youth Corps. If you're ever out at Withrow Springs, some of the rock work there, I actually did that when I was, I think, a sophomore in college the summer year, my summer break. And I worked at Purina Honeysuckle Turkey Plant, and I worked at George's Egg House, and I had all kinds of experiences that I didn't want to repeat. I ended up in Farmington because, I don't know if because we played Farmington a couple of years that I was at Mountainburg, or that I played golf with the superintendent, George Ledbetter, in the summertime out at Razorback. But he called me up one day and said both of his coaches had left, and he wanted me to come up and talk about it. So we had an interview in the cafeteria with the cafeteria lunch, and he hired me to coach football at Farmington, and that would be for the school year 1969-1970. Well, the first team was somewhat, it was interesting in that the kids were not used to hard work, and they weren't used to coming to practice on a regular basis. They weren't used to discipline. And it was kind of touch and go, and I always look back to the first team I had, the very first game against Prairie Grove, as a turning point, because I think had we lost that game, I think about half the team was prepared to quit. And as it was, we were at Prairie Grove, we were behind, but we won the game because Prairie Grove got tired in the fourth quarter. We had a couple of them cramp up, a couple of them throw up, and I stressed that to my players, and they got fired up and won the game in the fourth quarter. Well, I didn't believe in two-a-days, but the community and everybody felt since everybody else was having two-a-days, you should. We tried to get everything done in one practice because young people don't have a very long attention span, especially in hot weather when you're out there working. So we tried to get in all of our conditioning early in the morning and our pad work, and then when we came back in the afternoon, we didn't do any conditioning at all. We were in shorts and we worked on our specialties, punt, kick, and so on, that sort of thing. Because they can't concentrate when they're hot, sweating in a helmet and full pads. The first season I was at Farmington, our average backfield was like 135 pounds. Jackie Hill and Bobby Neal were the running backs, and Donnie Smith was the quarterback. I think Terry Swift was an end. We were very small, very slow, but after they got over the idea that hard work didn't kill them, and it actually paid off, everything worked out. Well, we wound up having a winning season. I believe we were 6-4. Farmington could never seem to beat Gentry. Gentry was the nemesis, and Gentry was in the playoffs, and they were hosting Danville, and Danville was the king in those days. And Danville just stomped Gentry at Gentry. It was 66-6 or something like that. And I watched Danville, and I wanted, they were so well coached and so disciplined, and their execution was flawless. And I came back and told my kids that that's what we were going to start doing. So I guess I was motivated by the first round of the playoffs. And sure enough, the very next year we wound up playing Danville in the first round of the playoffs. So it was, I'd have to say the playoffs was a motivational factor for me. In those days, they only took the winners of each conference. And then the team with the best record got a bye. So we actually got a bye, and we got to go watch Danville play Murfreesboro. And I told my kids not to go because I didn't want them to see Danville in action. And of course they showed up. Their parents drove them down, and frankly, I was scared to death of Danville. But the kids, after watching them play, were not. They actually were calm, cool, and collected, and they just went out and executed, and we played very conservative. In fact, my good friend Jack Harder, who was a dentist in Fayetteville and a longtime Razorback supporter, came by at halftime, and he said, it whispered in my ear, he said, "Don't forget the fullback." The fullback was Randall Lewis, and his little brother was Ricky Lewis, and they were our running game. And we managed to beat Danville. And that was the toughest game because they were the best team in the playoffs. We beat Magnet Cove at Russellville to win our first state championship and wind up 11-1. We lost our first game of the year to Prairie Grove at home. It was a non-conference game. But one of my best players broke his leg right in front of the bench in that game. And we had to wait like 30 minutes for an ambulance. They didn't have an on-site ambulance in those days. And our team was devastated. We just couldn't come back, and I think it still wound up like it was 13-6 or something, but we lost one. And then the next year, in 1973, we were 12-0. But probably going back to 72, the key game was Gentry, because Farmington had never beaten Gentry. And it's a mental thing, mental block. We knew we were better than they were, but the kids could not get over that hurdle. We had a real struggle to beat Gentry and even get to the playoffs. If we hadn't gotten to the playoffs, obviously we wouldn't win the state championship. Well, I mentioned Ricky Joe Lewis in 1972 was our leading rusher, and I think he still holds the record at Farmington for like over 1,700 yards rushing, and he was 5'3", 130 pounds. His brother Randall blocked for him at fullback. We had a relatively inexperienced offensive line that year, but then the next year, all the backs graduated and the line was experienced. Keith Mars and Tim Thomas and James Murphy, Eddie Walker. We had a good line. And of course, the first round we had to play Danville again in 1973. We played them at Ozark. And they switched their offense on us to one we had never seen in the second half, and so it became a shootout. We had to outscore them. It was a blow, like in the 30s. And if we hadn't beat them that year, of course, we wouldn't have won the state championship either. And we beat Hazen in 1973 for the state championship. The main rival was Prairie Grove. Prairie Grove was the first game of the year. It was non-conference for a long time. It's what we called our money game because we could make enough money to pay all our expenses and whoever had the home game that year. And it was usually a very tough rivalry. Usually the home team won. I used to call it the coach's contract game. You beat Prairie Grove, get to keep your job. Later on, we developed a rivalry with Huntsville, but it wasn't that long of a rivalry because we didn't move up and play them in their conference for a long time. It was just the last few years that I coached, we played Huntsville. I coached at Farmington 20 years or 21 years, exactly, I can't remember. Later on, to give you some idea how difficult it is to win a state championship, later on, we had 4 teams reach 12-0 and reach the semifinals of the state playoffs and couldn't get past the hurdle. And those games go down as, well, I don't know, they were very depressing and historical at the same time. The loss at Barton, which we felt like we had some really bad calls. Barton had the state record for the longest winning streak and so on and so on. And we lost by a point at Barton. And we lost on a last-second field goal to Boonville down at Van Buren. Sophomore kicker from the right hash mark. I thought we were going to go into overtime in that one. And then up here at Farmington in the mud in 1982, we lost to Hazen 12-8, and it rained the entire week. and the entire night the field was unplayable. And that's one of the few years that we had a wide open passing attack. I think the weather just did not like us. That was the year in Arkansas. It rained the entire next week also. And after that, they decided to move the playoffs to Little Rock on the turf because everybody had to play in the mud the next week also. It was not a true state championship game because of the weather. As I said before, when they first started the playoffs, only the winners got to go, the winners of each conference, so it was very quick, 3 games. And then they decided to add the winner and the runner-up, which is fine. That gave a little bit bigger field. But when they went to the 4-team format, I feel like the playoffs last way too long. And they're actually, I don't know, some people revel at the fact they just get to go to the playoffs regardless of their record, and they get beat in the first round. But I think it's difficult because, first of all, in the playoffs, everybody is a loser but one. No matter how great a season you had, you lose your last game unless you win it all. And there's only one team going to do that. All coaches have an old saying, the more games you win, the more people you see at the game. And towards the end of the season, people start showing up that have never even come to a game if you're winning. But the people were very supportive. Needless to say, they become a lot more expert as you win more games. I know one of my players commented to me one time that he enjoyed football a lot more than basketball because his daddy didn't play football. And his daddy wasn't an expert and couldn't chew him out after the game. But basically, they were supportive. The only time I guess I ever got accused of coaching is when we lost. Otherwise, as they put it, the boys played good. I feel like the key to success is to outwork the other people. At Farmington High School, we had one of the first off-season programs of anybody. When we started lifting weights in the off-season and running agility drills, the superintendent actually got some irate phone calls from parents. They want to know why we were working the boys when it wasn't in season. So rather than just sit in the bleachers and play volleyball, we worked. And I feel like we got quicker and stronger. And then, of course, discipline and conditioning, all a coach can do is try to eliminate the reasons for losing. You don't want to lose a game because you're out of shape. You don't want to lose a game because you get a 15-yard penalty for fighting or something like that. And then the kids have to buy into it. I learned a lot of things in my brief playing career at Huntsville, what not to do. Because at Huntsville, when I was playing, we didn't think we could win, and therefore we didn't. And my goal at Farmington was to teach the kids that they could win, try to make them believe they could win. You come down to which came first, the chicken or the egg. How do you get confidence? You get confidence by winning. It's tough. And of course, you can't win without talent. You can't win without coaching. I've seen good coaches win with poor talent. I've seen poor coaches win with good talent. I've seen coaches mess up good talent. They have players that are really good, but they have no discipline. So it's a fine balance. When I came to Farmington, there wasn't much but the Cardinal Diner and Roland Davis's grocery store. They could put in, make you a really good bologna sandwich at Roland's store. And they had a laundromat. And 2-lane road, the football field was surrounded by apple orchards, and across the road was grazing cattle, and there was hardly anything here in Farmington at that time. There was a time when I would go out on the practice field, which was right on the highway, south of the old gym, and hit golf balls, and a couple of my players, Ronnie Hudson for one, would go across the road with their baseball gloves and field them for me. And at that time, Ronnie also, he and his brothers, helped me mow the football field, which fortunately you only had to mow a couple times a year because you couldn't water it or fertilize it, but we mowed the football field with push Yazoo mower. He brought his mower up, and we had one at the school, so we had 2 mowers to mow the football field. And we were so poor, Farmington School was so poor, the superintendent, George Ledbetter, bless his heart, he did really, really good for the school, but he wouldn't buy lime to put lines down on the field. Instead, we used commodity flour. So if we had a light rain, our lines were rising. One of the biggest supporters or best boosters of Farmington High School was Buddy Elkins. He was our postmaster. He's passed away, but you could count on Buddy for anything, to help build goalposts, to help build bleachers, paint, anything you needed. Anytime we needed anything over at the shop, Roy Hummel was always there. He was our agri teacher. Well, at Farmington High School, we didn't have a lot of scholarship football players go on to college, but Buddy Condiff comes to mind. He played fullback here and linebacker, and he went on and had a 4-year career at Arkansas Tech. Brent Jackson was one of our linebackers, had a 4-year career at Ouachita Baptist. My son, Jay Holland, went down to Henderson State for 4 years. Bill Cooper went to Abilene Christian. Bill Cooper played on the state championship team in 1973. Brent Jackson and Jay and Buddy were all on those 12-1 teams that got to the semifinals. And we had a lot of unknown players that didn't go on, but they epitomized Farmington football, the 5'5", 150-pound kids that were just tough. Mike Kilpatrick comes to mind. He was a nose guard, and he'd lost an eye in a hunting accident. He only had one eye, and I was really scared to let him play, but he wanted to play. And the side of his helmet that had the eye was, the face mask was always bent up because he always led with that eye. Of course, the Farmington and Prairie Grove kids were familiar with each other. They hauled hay and worked together and lived sometimes in each other's backyard. In the early days, Farmington rotated a lot of Prairie Grove rotated a lot of coaches because they had a very active booster club. I used to say it was very difficult for a coach to stay over 2 or 3 years at Prairie Grove, and that's why Coach Danny Absher has done such an outstanding job. He's been there forever. And you notice when they kept a coach for a while, it solidified the program. I remember Kenny Ramey being at Prairie Grove. They were always tough when Kenny was there. And Vol Eads was there. My first superintendent at Farmington was George Ledbetter. And he was interested in keeping the school running, keep the buses running and the kids fed. And I worked for Merle Massey, Randall Lynch, Gilbert Bisher. Well, there must be some good things about Farmington because everybody wants to move here. They want their kids to go to school. Farmington has a really good school, has always had a reputation for that. The facilities are fixing to be state of the art. They're working on them. They do have a new gymnasium that is state of the art. And it's, you don't have to worry about crime. I mean, we have a good police department. It's just a nice, safe place to live. I guess my favorite thing about Farmington would be location. You're right in the shadows of the goalposts of the Razorback Stadium and all the entertainment and anything you want in Fayetteville. And you're also close to Oklahoma if you want to go fishing.